From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, it happened this week, Monday night, the much-anticipated return to the Ed Sullivan Theater by Stephen Colbert. As you know, I'm fascinated by the whole late-night format. I have been since I was a kid, and it's just gotten more and more interesting over the years. Through the retirement of Carson and, of course, the big battle between Leno and Letterman, and then the advent of The Daily Show and the explosion of all the different shows on cable, and the current crop. I'm fascinated by it. Not to say I'm a fan of it. I mean, I guess I am. But the format itself is in trouble. Well, okay, I'm self-correcting here on the spot. The format is nearly indestructible. The host, the sidekick, the band, the monologue, the guests. Ever since Steve Allen, I mean, it's really been a mainstay. And the format is proven to be indestructible. The desk bits, the person on the street bits, it all, in the right hands, it really works. Well, the current crop of hosts is really interesting. Of course, it's still too white and too male, with some dents in that expectation, but not many. But let's talk about Colbert, because he currently is king of the hill. He leads in the ratings. He got all this attention for this Monday show. And I got to say, I've been saying it for over a year, ever since COVID sent all the late-night hosts into their bedrooms and their basements and their in-laws' houses or wherever they wound up. I've been saying all along, oh my God, these shows are so much better without those obnoxious live studio audiences. I had every expectation that on Monday night, the show would be just completely disrupted by that audience. It wouldn't make it a better show. As a matter of fact, it would ruin it. For me, this is personal taste, I guess. And my worst expectations were met. He just hammed it up for the audience. He wasn't necessarily funny. He kind of forgot about us at home and played to the audience. And he did all his pandering. In fact, I think that was his very first joke. Something about, I don't know if I still remember how to pander to such a beautiful audience or something like that. And of course, they screamed and yelled and clapped. They chanted Stephen, Stephen. Oh my God, it's obnoxious. It doesn't serve the show at all. It's a television show. You have millions of viewers at home. You have a couple of hundred people at most in front of you in the live studio. And you're playing to 200 people rather than 2 million or however many there are watching. You forget why you're there. And that's why over the year of COVID, I really enjoyed, and it's a very limited sample because I don't run around and look at all these shows. I'll jump on YouTube occasionally or Facebook and I'll check something out. I'll check out a clip from any of the many shows. I'll tell you the 3 that I've watched with some regularity. I check out Seth Meyers' Closer Look because he posts those segments. And I think they're insightful and funny and well written and well delivered. And Seth Meyers, of all the hosts, got it right when COVID came along. He changed his delivery. He just changed his attitude. It was all about him and the camera and the viewer, and he understood his responsibility. And I don't use that word lightly. You've got an hour of network time. You have a responsibility. You can't be wasting everybody's time and money. You better be giving us something we can use. And Seth Meyers seemed to take that responsibility seriously. And he and his producers and writers, somebody who needs to get a mention, Mike Shoemaker is his primary producer and partner for many years. And the two of them put together a show that understood the new requirements of the no audience show. It's the performer, it's the camera, it's the person sitting alone on their couch or laying in their bed at home, And that is now your responsibility. Make it work. And they did. To their credit, they did a really good job. It looked really nothing like the audience show. It was more like what you and I are doing right now. It's an intimate one-to-one communication, except with a whole team of really funny writers, which I don't have. If I did, I'd be funny, but I'm very rarely funny. I might get lucky once or twice a week. I might come out with something that's actually worthy of laughter. By the way, side note, if you listen to comedians, they all have a podcast, right? Every comedian has a podcast. Well, if you're a regular sort of podcast subscriber, listener, if you've tuned around to these different comedians, here's an alert. Most of them, all of them, they're not funny, really, in their podcast because they're just talking like I'm talking to you now. And they are remarkably normal people. Now, that's not a critique. It takes quite a lot to just be funny. It's you can't do a half hour every day or even every week and just be funny on your own, just extemporaneously funny. That's a rare talent. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of anybody. That's why they have rooms filled with writers. It's part of the magic. So if you listen to top comedians doing their podcast, typically they're not very funny. And again, that's not a critique. That's just the fact of things. So, all right, that was an aside. So, yeah, Colbert's audience is back. So disappointing. Well, so expected. I really expected nothing less. It was, to my ear, to my eye, just a complete disappointment. And I'm so sad the live audiences are back and that the Stephen Colberts of the world now just play to their live audience. Let's see. The show itself came out, did a little monologue, just, I don't know, moderately funny, I guess, maybe, in a real tame 21st century late night kind of way. Again, I've been a fan of the format forever, but oh my God, we've become so tame, especially when you put it next to other formats, you know, YouTube and TikTok and whatever other social media. And we got kids in basements and bedrooms, and we got now the long-standing Cartoon Network's Adult Swim. There's so many different formats for comedy, and so much of it is so damn funny and innovative. You look at these late night guys, and it's like going back in time. It's like, what dinosaurs you are. Can you take a clue from the new generation? So he comes out, does a monologue, panders to the audience, brings out his wife, Evie, who I guess was more often than not in the room when he was doing his no audience show. So she was basically his one-person audience. So she came out and gives this little, it looked like a local Chamber of Commerce meeting or something. Bring out the wife and let her say a few words to the audience. It was completely self-serving. And I'll go back to the whole responsibility thing again. You have an hour on network television. Who are you doing this for? If you're not going to do it for the home viewer, then don't do it. Give it to somebody else. And as sweet as maybe it was to bring his wife out, that was 100% for him, for her. It wasn't for anyone else. If you have an hour of network television, you got to use it. You can't waste a minute of it. And that was completely self-serving, self-indulgent. All right, so then what does he do at the desk? I don't recall. Oh, he talks with, he talks with Dana Carvey as Joe Biden. So he interviews the president. And everybody, reading the reviews yesterday. And I waited to talk to you about this. I wanted to see what the reviews had to say. And I was disappointed. What happened to television criticism? What happened to television critics? I know they're out there, but everything I could find, and I read about a dozen different articles. It was like you're reading the local paper about what the neighbors are up to. Well, so-and-so went on vacation, or Or maybe their story about a local community theater production. Well, this happened and then this happened, and starring in the show was local dentist Dave Jones or whatever. It was just a kind of a recounting of what happened on the show with no actual criticism. I crave criticism. Good old-fashioned cultural, artistic criticism. And there was none to be found. It was just a recounting of what happened. Or, even worse, this kind of small-town newspaper cheerleading. Oh, it was a very emotional return, and Dana Carvey's Joe Biden was spot on. Which, I don't know. Generally, criticism these days is way too generous and way too forgiving. I suppose it was all right. You know, he spent quite a long time in the makeup chair, it looked like, and the wig was very good, and I wasn't really crazy that he sort of played up Joe's alleged dementia as the hook. You know, with that kind of an impression, especially a Dana Carvey caricature-type impression, you got to find that central characteristic, that hook, and then you sort of hang everything on that. And I'm not quite sure it's fair to hang the old man getting confused telling wandering stories hook, to hang everything on that for Joe. I don't know how funny it is. It seems a little bit mean, unnecessarily. It seems kind of ageist. I think you better, comedians and impressionists, I think you better keep looking for that hook. Don't take Dana Carvey's lead on this. You and I talked about when Jim Carrey did the Joe Biden impression on SNL a few months ago, and he struggled to find his hook. He did kind of a stock Jim Carrey character that was just maddeningly insane, and that didn't seem to make much sense. But then, he only did it a few weeks, but you could see the character evolve. It's like Jim Carrey was looking for it. Okay, well, and then the next week he tried more of a kind of wink and do the little thing with your mouth and the crooked smile and pointing and saying, "Hey, Jack, come on, man." That's overconfident kind of guy who drives the convertible. And I thought that was a little funnier and a little more to the point. Because, as I said at the time, whether you love Joe Biden or hate him, he's not insane. He's not a manic wild man like a Jim Carrey character. So Jim Carrey made that adjustment. And now Dana Carvey has his turn at it. You know, it's funny with each new president. You expect the impressionists, the comedians, to do the impression. And it usually takes a little while. So we are in that phase right now, where people are trying to figure out how to do Joe Biden. And I think maybe at some point it'll come together. I guess it always does. I mean, the Orange Menace was just a gift to comedians from day one. There was no trouble finding lots of different hooks, and of course the bravado and the false confidence and the lying and it was pretty easy. And the squinting eyes and the little anus mouth. So everybody had fun with that right out of the gate. So Stephen Colbert interviews the president, a.k.a. Dana Carvey, and that's okay. That's fine. There again, kind of your standard fossilized humor. It's just so ancient, this stuff. It's so spent. It's so done forever and ever. Then, okay, now we come to the guest, and you may have heard about this. If you haven't heard, Jon Stewart of Daily Show fame, the Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert's best buddy and one of the executive producers of The Late Show. He is now the first guest on the new show. And here again, I'm looking for critique, and I'm not finding anybody willing to take much of a stand. If you haven't heard the news by now, he went off. Jon Stewart went on this manic rant about how the coronavirus escaped from a Wuhan lab, which is primarily a right-wing conspiracy theory. All the experts, including Fauci, hold it open as a possibility, as do I. And I'm no expert. I'm just repeating what I hear from the experts. And what I hear from reliable voices, Fauci and a million others, is that, yeah, that's possible. It could have happened. It's not as likely as other theories, but it certainly could have happened. And it would be better if we knew where it came from. So nobody's necessarily discounting it. But it's the Republican conspiracy theorists and it's the Ron Johnsons of the world who are insisting that that's the only explanation. And not only that, but adding some sort of nefarious intention on the part of the Chinese, just making it the worst possible scenario they can imagine. That's where it enters the conspiracy theory realm. Well, to everyone's shock, including Stephen Colbert, live in the moment as we're watching, Jon Stewart just goes on this manic rant about his absolute certainty of the source of the virus. And not only that, a very, I'll use the word that is popular these days, unhinged, to my ear, an unhinged rant against science itself. He wasn't necessarily, Jon Stewart wasn't necessarily taking the anti-Chinese tack that the conspiracy theorists of the Republican Party take. No, he's taking what appears to be an anti-science approach. Science is great, but it goes too far, and it's the cause of all of our problems. And to his many critics the following day, fans of his, ex-fans of his, and certainly from the scientific community, huge blowback about his anti-science rant and his insistence on the lab theory. And that was certainly my response as I was watching. I said, "What are you doing?" A lot of comedians will use the cover. Well, I'm a comedian. I'm not a pundit. I'm going for laughs. I'm just a comedian, so don't listen to me. That's not Jon Stewart. No. He has crossed the threshold long ago. Jon Stewart is number one, whether he wants to admit it or not, whether he wants the position or not. He is a pundit. He is a thought influencer. Number one, far above his role as a funny person. And I'll tell you the truth, he ain't that funny without the Daily Show format. This might be just an opinion. I think I could make a case. Ever since he left that show, outside of that format, he's really not a very funny guy. He doesn't make me laugh. He just goes off. And he's so certain about things. He's so absolutely 100% certain. And again, he is much more of a politician / pundit / commentator, far beyond his role as a comedian. And especially after his, he testified before Congress a few times. He's gotten out front on compensation for 9/11 survivors and for other first responders. He's an activist. He's a commentator. Comedy comes a far distant second or third with this guy. Kind of like Bill Maher. He cannot use that excuse anymore. Well, I'm just a comedian. No. He is first and foremost, whether he wants to admit it or not, he's a commentator, he's a pundit. People listen to him, people follow him, people repeat his opinions. He wants that role. Comedian is way down the list of what these guys are now. So, Jon Stewart did not do his buddy Stephen Colbert any favors by going on this weird rant. And he didn't let it go. That was the funny thing. Colbert just was desperately trying to steer him to another topic or to get him to just shut up, even just to go to a commercial break. Colbert is desperately trying to reroute his friend, and Stewart is having none of it. And he just went on and on and on. Even after the break, he comes back, and still there's more. And to the very end, to the very bitter end of his segment, he closed with a joke. I'm paraphrasing now, something about how, here's how the world will end. It'll be some scientists in a lab saying, "Oh, well, that didn't work," or something to that effect. In other words, that's going to be our end. He said, it's not going to be war. It's not going to be global warming. It's not going to be any of the things we're afraid of. He said that'll all be fine. When we go, it's going to be scientists who kill us because science goes too far. It doesn't know how to say no. Well, here's the thing with that line of argument. he tries to have it both ways. He's making a serious point. He's using comedy to relieve himself of the responsibility to actually make the point. And then, as I've said, he can go back and use that as an excuse. Well, I'm just a comedian. No. You believe this. You're making a point. You're saying it. People listen to you. You are an influencer. Like it or not, you're an important, influential voice. And on Monday night, he made some really, really dangerous and irresponsible comments about not only the virus, but about science generally, and scientists and how they work and how they do their work, and our relationship with science and scientists. This is not lighthearted comedy kind of stuff. If you're going to do your commentary in a satirical way, then you got to take full responsibility. You can't use the comedy as a shield to make a bad argument and then say, oh, well, it's just comedy. No. So Jon Stewart really just failed miserably and did a great disservice to the nation. And I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating, because back to my original line of thinking here, the late night format is huge culturally in this country. It has been. It does have influence. It does make a difference. It's not just a little toss away. The people in those positions can't use that excuse. I'm just an entertainer. I'm just a comedian. You've lost that privilege. That excuse no longer applies. The big ones, especially the big network ones, the 11:30 slot or 10:30 Central on the big three networks, sorry, you have responsibility. All right, what else happened on the show? I guess that's about it. I would love to see somebody tackle late night without an audience. Go back to the old, if you're old enough to remember, Tom Snyder had a show that followed, I think it followed Carson. I'm trying to remember my late night history here. I think he had the slot following Carson before Letterman got late night in the 12:30, 11:30 Central slot. Is that right? Anyway, Tom Snyder's format was just himself and a guest and no audience. A very sparse set, just a couple of chairs. It was like between two ferns, basically. But Tom Snyder was a smart guy, and he had A-level guests. And if he did make a little quip, which he occasionally did, you might hear the producer, the cameraman chuckle a little bit. That was fine. It's part of the format. But I'd really like to see that. I've mentioned a couple times right here that I was not a fan of Trevor Noah and The Daily Show. I thought he was generally not that funny with an audience. And as soon as COVID hit and it was just him and the camera and the viewer, I fell in love with the guy. It was so direct. It was so different than what he had been doing. He was genuinely funny, like really very funny, very engaging. And I became a fan of Trevor Noah. I'll be so sad when he goes back to the live audience, because I know that'll be gone forever probably. Nothing would make me happier. And I know it's not going to happen. If Trevor Noah just made an announcement, he said, you know what, we're just going to keep doing this show. Regardless of the pandemic, if it goes away completely, whatever the CDC says, we don't care. All of that notwithstanding, we're just going to do this format now because we like it. And it's working. Now I know that's not going to happen, but nothing would make me happier. So I've spent an entire episode here talking about this, but just to repeat, the late night format to me is fascinating and powerful and has an influence on the nation. It literally does. It has an influence on elections, on how people vote. I don't think I'm overstating the case. Saturday Night Live and the weeknight comedy talk shows. Now, there's 100 of them out there. I've only mentioned a couple of them. But the classic standard format, which is still going strong, and I don't see any end in sight. The desk, the guests, the monologue, the bits, the on-the-street segments. I don't see that changing. It's been forever and ever. Here, a quick little personal story if we have time. I'll do a little name dropping here. I met Dick Cavett once, who I just loved as a kid, especially as I got a little bit older and I realized I realized how smart his conversations were and the kind of guests. He'd have James Baldwin and Gore Vidal, these classic actors and actresses from the Hollywood golden years. He had John Dean and others from the Watergate era. He was just always on top of it with the very best guests and very intellectual conversations. And as a kid, I started to realize how unique he was and his show was. And it's only been these last few years. I went back to watching him occasionally because they've got him on one of the oldies stations. They run repeats of his show, and I'll tune in occasionally. And now as an adult, even more appreciation for the intellect of this guy and the level of conversation he was having. Just amazing. Well, my personal story is I got to meet him once because I was performing in a show called Beach Blanket Babylon in San Francisco, long-running musical review. It was the thing to do when you're in San Francisco. And so occasionally we'd get a celebrity come and see us. Well, I'm leaving one night, going out the stage door, and there's Dick Cavett standing at the stage door saying, can I come in and meet the cast? I said, well, sure. Okay, come on in. So I show him in, he meets the cast, and he invited us out. And like a dummy, this was the worst decision I've ever made in my life. I declined Dick Cavett's invitation. I don't know what I was thinking. I was young, I was cocky, I was king of the world, and Dick Cavett had a reputation. I'd read about this in a few articles. He had a reputation for being kind of verbose and long-winded, and he gets people out and doesn't stop talking. He talks your ear off, dominates the conversation, and can be kind of obnoxious. So I read an article or two about this, and I thought, I don't want to do that. So I declined. He did wind up going out with a couple of other cast members. They came in the next night for we're getting ready for the show, and Brent was one of the guys he went out with. And Brent was telling us in the dressing room, oh my God, he wouldn't stop talking. He went on and on and on with these long stories. And we just couldn't wait to get out of there. So I felt vindicated in the moment. But pretty much every minute after that, I thought back and I really regretted that decision. It was really stupid. I dropped an opportunity to sit and talk with Dick Cavett all night long. And he could have told me all about his interviews with Groucho Marx and Betty Davis and Bobby Kennedy and all of them. I could have just sat and listened to his stories all night. My biggest regret in life. What a bad decision that was. Oh, my heart just sinks. I missed that opportunity. So anyway, there's my little personal sidebar. But yeah, the late night format, just fascinating, and so much power, so much influence on the country. I really believe that COVID presented an opportunity to pretty much create a brand new format, and I would just love for somebody to take that and to run with it. That intimate, that direct connection. Love to see that continue in some way. All right, there it is. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.